Hey, I want to address an issue which has often been raised by masculists, men's rights activists, and that is the argument that there is a war on men and boys. Not a war in the sense of weapons and, not Syria, not that sort of war, but metaphorically speaking, a relentless assault on men and boys. Um, I made a video on this subject about, I guess it would have been about a year ago. I made so many videos. But I do believe these issues are important to address. I've just watched an interview on Sky News on YouTube with Mike Buchanan, who is the leader of the political group Justice for Men and Boys. Um, I said that I don't identify myself as a men's rights activist or a masculist because I'm concerned it will end up being just as polarizing as feminism, and I'm still not going to call myself a masculist. But I definitely have some sympathies with that movement, and I definitely see where it comes from. This isn't just about empathy with fellow males, but it's because I believe that it is an understandable response to years of feminist onslaught. They were discussing the Charlotte Proudman case, and you know, I'd rather not talk about her. I'd rather not give her the airtime. I don't think she deserves to be famous. I think she's just a bitter individual who doesn't deserve the airtime. But she is becoming a template for everything that is obnoxious about modern third wave feminism. And she is choosing to let this thing go on because she's not relenting really. She's not letting this just pass. She is absolutely determined that not only this man that she named and shamed is destroyed, but any man that disagrees with her. Um, she's actually the definition of a bully, but no one's going to call her that. Certainly not the media, because feminists have assumed a sort of mantle of being above critique, and I think that's a disgrace. Um, I'm going to focus on this in several areas, and apologies if I sound like I'm repeating some of the things I've said in previous videos. But like I say, the issues are ongoing, so it's always topical. Um, First of all, is the issue of women's rights. Now, any fair-minded person will recognize that in the world there are some major human rights abuses. Mike Buchanan, for example, quoted that Charlotte Proudman is studying the issue of FGM, female genital mutilation in university at Cambridge University, and he highlighted the fact that male genital mutilation is massively ignored by comparison. Now, any level-minded person would recognize that both issues are a very big problem, except one gets a lot more attention than the other. But addressing the issue of women's human rights, it's true that all over the world there can be examples of this. I watched a documentary on Dhaka last night, the Bangladeshi capital, and the overwhelming majority of garment workers are women. So in many developing countries, there are issues that disproportionately impact women. Although it could be argued, for example, the majority of minors are men. So it just depends what area you look at. Um, but as an egalitarian, I do recognize that women's human rights issues do exist. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, literally thousands of women are used as weapons of war. In parts of South Asia, there's hideous examples of acid attacks on women, sometimes men, but it is mostly women. In Latin America, violence against women is endemic, although in world terms, violence against men is actually a lot higher. So there are many issues that impact women. There are also many issues that impact men. Um, Needless to say, the feminist movement has tried to imply that it's only women that suffer in the world. It's hardline feminists actually dispute that there is any such thing as men's human rights issues. And that's why the masculist movement has been encouraged to be active, because they have to dispel the lies feminists spread. In terms of there being a war on men, now, a while back I would have thought, well, this is a very loaded term, especially, it sounds almost crude to talk about war when when there's actual physical wars going on in the world, like Syria, South Sudan, and so on. But a war in a metaphorical sense, I think, is probably an appropriate term to describe the behavior of radical militant feminists. I cannot think of a better adjective, quite frankly. Um, I'm not going to say all feminists, because I don't think the moderate feminists really do hate men. Um, I still think that people should be very careful before labeling themselves. For example, if you call yourself a feminist and you're actually for men's rights, and you have to be aware of the connotations that that word has and the very negative image that the movement currently has. What I've noticed is a discrepancy between the public and the media on this. And this is not the first time. Not so long ago, Time magazine, which is a famous American magazine, published a poll on which word should be banned. The top word that came on the poll was feminism or feminist. Now, something strange happened. Time then apologized. Who to, I can only guess, but they apologized for that word coming top. Now, this is very strange. A magazine launches a poll. The response is that their readers vote a particular word at the top. They then feel compelled to apologize. Now, what I'm thinking is, who are they apologizing to? And I can only think the feminist lobby. That to me indicates that the feminist movement, contrary to being victims, actually have a very big influence, especially in politics and especially in the media in Western countries. It's profound. That's why Charlotte Proudman is being given, in my view, such an easy ride. I'm not saying that journalists are slavish should be going along with what she is saying, but I don't believe they're challenging her as much as they should be. For example, they should be saying, Miss Proudman, are you aware of that sexism is defined as such and such? How can you describe this statement as sexist? They should be really pushing her on that. I'm not saying they should agree with uh, Alexander Carter Silk, whatever the guy's name is. I'm not saying they should automatically take his side. They have to be fair and balanced. They have to sort of show both sides. But I still think they're giving her a very easy ride. And that's generally the situation with feminism. When media outlets bring feminists on to discuss a particular subject, they'll give the feminists a lot of airtime to promote their hatred and their propaganda. Um, on the very rare occasion that they do get men's rights spokesman like Mike Buchanan, it's brief. Um, I just think there's a complete lack of proportionality with this. I'm not someone that says there's no issues that impact women. I believe there are issues that impact women, but I also believe there's at least as many issues that impact men, at least as many, and in a country like Britain, arguably more. Um, I'd like to make a few closing points here. I think there's some good news with this. The good news is that most people are starting to realize, and actually, I would say most women as well, are starting to get fed up with this relentless mourning of third wave feminists, militant feminists. I'm not talking about women who believe in equality and speak out on women's rights issues. I'm talking about hardcore militant feminists like Charlotte Proutman who will actively find a way to be offended, who want to be offended. Some people have said if the person complimenting her was young and rich, she would have had a very different response. Well, we don't know that. Maybe she hates all men. We don't know. But the point is, she blatantly overreacted to what he said. And the fact that she named and shamed him demonstrates that far from being a victim, she is actually trying to persecute this man. She's trying to destroy his reputation and his career for no other reason than passing a compliment. And I think it's frankly disgusting. Now, some men have responded in a way of sort of like focusing on looks and so on. I think that's a mistake because that's the sort of thing that feminists will latch onto. And people who haven't followed this whole story will think, oh, I saw one comment from a woman saying, oh, will all these misogynistic comments prove her point? I said, well, look, do you understand the whole context here? The reason people are making those comments is because they're angry at just how pathetic this woman is. Um, I do think it is very important to understand the whole context. And if you look at the entire exchange between the two, another point worth mentioning, I didn't say this in the previous video, she actually contacted him first. That's a point that hasn't been widely reported. She actually sent a message to him to be connected on this site, LinkedIn. I don't know much about LinkedIn. I don't know how it works, but she contacted him first. Um, what I would say to women who describe themselves as feminists, it's fine if you believe in genuine equality and if you believe in women's rights. But if you're going to take an approach like Charlotte Proudman, I would say learn from this. This is not a case of the media bullying her. In fact, the media is being very muted in terms of their response. This has largely been a case of a very nasty agenda by a thoroughly unpleasant individual backfiring. Her intention was clearly to destroy this man. He's the real victim, arguably. Was his comment inappropriate? Perhaps. But what I'm saying, and what most people recognize, is that her response was massively disproportionate. And it wasn't just that angry email that she sent back. It's the fact she has went to the press on this. I mean, what the hell? I do think there's one good aspect to this, and that is now that she is in the public eye, no man with any level of common sense will have anything to do with this woman. She'll be single for the rest of her life, unless she prefers women. And even women would be wary of her, but she's clearly a control freak. I've got no sympathy for her. She's 27 years old. She's not a naive young woman. She's clearly driven by power. She's clearly knows how to manipulate and to portray herself as a victim. I've heard segments of her speaking. She's soft spoken, so she doesn't rant and rave. But beneath that facade, we have a thoroughly, in my opinion, a thoroughly nasty individual. I've no sympathy with her. And I think she just is the personification. This isn't just about her. It's about every other militant feminist out there who is determined to wage this war on men, is determined to find defense over nothing, is determined to make themselves out to be a victim. And frankly, I think that is an insult to the original principle of feminism. If I was a moderate feminist, I would feel offended by her behavior. Why? Because I would think, wait a second, there's actual women's rights issues going on out there. We should be addressing those issues. Instead, we're giving platform to someone who is basically making a mockery of the perceived principle of feminism. So I'll leave it there, but I don't want to say there's a war on men because that sounds like someone who's kind of paranoid and like, I don't want to sound like I have a victimhood mentality. Speaking personally, I've got no, I get on very well with women, and in my own personal life, I would consider myself quite fortunate. But I do believe that any man that gets on the wrong side of these people, from their point of view, i.e., an absolutely innocent form of communication, which is massively spun out of all proportion, that man will find himself in very, very, very deep shit. Um, because he's not going to get a fair hearing. This man has got a fair hearing from the public. But, what I'd like to know is why he hasn't been on to defend himself. And maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe he wants to keep a low profile. And that's understandable. But if this is a case that she's been given her view and he hasn't been allowed to defend himself, that is an utter disgrace. Um, he said at the start of the comment, I know this is politically incorrect. And he hit on to something with that. She then tried to justify her response by saying he acknowledged he was wrong. No, he didn't. He said it was politically incorrect. So what she's saying is that if something's politically correct, it must be right, and that's just horseshit. To my fellow men, I would say be very, very careful about complimenting any woman in this sort of position because there's a relative chance that they will be a hardline feminist. I'm not saying that every woman in the position of power is, but many are. And frankly, as a man, I would be extremely cautious. Before passing a compliment, I'd make sure I knew the woman relatively well, and I would want to make sure that she was the sort of woman that would take it as it is intended. Um, Unfortunately, we've got to that situation. This is destroying relations between men and women. And like I said in the previous video, it's going to create a generation of lonely women and men who are perhaps paranoid or perhaps reluctant to communicate with any women, and I just think that's tragic. You know, um, the point about feminists is if they're insulted, that's sexism. If they are complimented, that's sexism. If they're ignored, then it's a male patriarchy, not giving them a voice. Basically, unless you slavishly grovel to the likes of Charlotte Proudman, then you can't win. And to other women who don't fit their feminist conformity, then, this is the point. It isn't just against men. Feminists bully other women as well who don't describe themselves as feminists. So I do think there's a turning point over the last 2 or 3 years. I do think this is starting to turn around, and I do believe the majority of people now are getting fed up with this. And it is a responsibility of the press to reflect public opinion. And I'm not saying to be anti-feminist. I'm just saying that they have a responsibility to report the consensus of what public opinion is clearly swaying towards, and to at least reflect that. They can be fair and balanced. They can give feminists their interviews and all the rest of it. But what I would say is at the moment they're given way too much airtime, and they're given way too much. They're off the hook basically. In my opinion, their hateful views should be challenged robustly. If I was a talk show host, and if I ever invited a militant feminist onto my show, this is like fantasy, Dan. It's not going to happen. But if I did, I would let her have her say, but I would not let her off the hook. I would put these points to her and get her to challenge. I would put her on the spot. Put it that way. Because if you're going to assume a position of being an angry woman who just wants to launch this crusade against men, then you damn well better expect a response.